against Tennessee coming up. So keep an eye on the Malik Willis revenge game, maybe or maybe not happening. Let's get to starts and sits with Michael F. Florio, who writes our column on NFL.com. Check it out, NFL.com/startsit. Who are we starting at quarterback this week, Mike?
Would you play the quarterback that has the most fantasy points this year?
Yes.
Play Baker Mayfield. You heard it here first. Baker Mayfield has just been eating right now. The QB1 on the season. What I like is with the Bucs struggling to run the ball, Baker is running it more himself. You see there, he's ran for at least 20 rushing yards in both games. He added the rushing touchdowns. The Bucs are clicking on all cylinders right now offensively. He's got Godwin, Mike Evans, Jalen McMillan at his disposal. So given the weapons, given the matchup, everything there, I think that Baker Mayfield, you have to keep riding the hot hand. The Broncos allowed Geno Smith to be the QB9 in week 1. And then talking about continuing to ride the hot hand, Derek Carr, he is the QB2 right now in fantasy football. He has scored over 21 fantasy points in each game, and there is an actual change in this offense that has me buying into it. They went from using play action at the lowest rate last season to the highest in the NFL. They also went from barely using motion. They had it the second most frequent in their offense last year. Now they're in the top 10. So those are two changes that I could buy into. Plus, the Eagles have allowed the 9th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, including the 3rd most passing touchdowns. And if they could get scoring on their own on Philly's side, it probably means more throwing for Derek Carr.
Okay, those guys so hot to start the season. Who are we putting on the bench at quarterback?
I'm going to be very hated in a certain city in Texas, but I'm sitting America's quarterback in Dak Prescott right now. He has failed to reach 13 fantasy points in either of his 2 games this season, and he has just thrown a single touchdown in each of those 2 games, but it's more about the Ravens' defense. They generate pressure at a very high rate, have allowed just 2 passing touchdowns this season, the same number of interceptions that they have forced. They limited Mahomes to 15 fantasy points in week 1, and just 1 time in their last 14 games have they allowed 18 fantasy points to a quarterback. That's almost a full season. I think you have to fade this matchup.
Yeah, an interesting matchup between 2 very good quarterbacks and 2 teams. They could be looking at a rough start to 2024. Let's go over some running backs, Mike. Who are we putting in our lineups?
Christian McCaffrey's out again, so must start Mason. That's what I'm calling Jordan Mason until CMC returns. He followed up his huge week 1 with 100 rushing yards and a touchdown, gave you over 17 fantasy points last week. And what I love, other 49ers running backs combined this season have played just 4 snaps. So he is getting all of the volume there. And the Rams defense is extremely banged up. They've allowed the highest rush EPA to running backs and the 5th most fantasy points per game. And then look, he's disappointed 2 weeks in a row, but I'm willing to give Zamir White a 3rd chance. Why? Because 1, Antonio Pierce continues to say they want to feed White more, and this should be the matchup where they could do so. Game script should be on the Raiders' side. The Panthers have allowed the most yards before contact this year, meaning that White will actually be able to get going before he has to try to run through some defenders. He should have the chance for some big runs. Plus, we've seen running backs run all over them for the last year plus, and they've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs so far on this season. So give White another chance. 3rd time is the charm.
All right, well, if we're giving Zamir White another chance, that means somebody's got to go down. Who's going on the bench?
Najee Harris. He's not going on my bench because I wasn't drafting him in a whole lot of places, but if you have him, I think you got to sit him this week. He's yet to score 9 fantasy points in a game, and those were games with favorable game scripts where the Steelers were winning throughout. Might not be the case this week. He also has the 3rd lowest yards per carry this season. The Chargers have allowed the 2nd lowest rush EPA to running backs. He is more of a floor play than a ceiling play, and when a floor play has a tough matchup, it lowers the floor, which means you sit them in fantasy.
Oddly, the Chargers bringing in the number 1 efficiency-wise rush and pass defense, going up against the team that hasn't scored but 1 offensive touchdown that we saw from Washington last week. Let's get back with some more starts and sits for week 3 in fantasy football with Michael F. Florio. Again, go to NFL.com/startsit to see the full column. Who are we starting at wide receiver?
It has been a disappointing 2 weeks so far for Brandon Ayuk, but this is the get-right game. Get him into your lineup. The Rams have been cooked this year by speedy wide receivers out wide, and that is what Brandon Ayuk is. We know he is fast. He runs 90% of his routes out wide. And look, I love my man Trey White, But in week 1, we saw him giving up long touchdowns to Jameson Williams. In week 2, he was getting burned by Marvin Harrison Jr. The Rams this season have allowed the most yards to wide receivers who line up out wide and on deep passes. I think Brandon Ayuk now, especially without Deebo Samuel there, is going to eat this week. Get him into your lineup. I cannot say the same for my man Amari Cooper. He has finished with fewer than 20 receiving yards in back-to-back games for the first time since early 2018. Almost a third of his targets are deep passes, which you would think is a good thing for someone with his skill set, but it's not when his quarterback has been the worst downfield thrower since he signed with the Cleveland Browns. That makes Amari Cooper a very boom or bust option. I can't get away from him in some leagues, but if you have another option, take it. And Jameis, please save us. And then I'm also sitting Michael Pittman Jr. if you can get away. He is just 6 fantasy points per game this year, despite a healthy target share. Anthony Richardson has the second lowest completion rate since the start of last season. We're seeing a lot of running and deep throws out of the Colts, and I think that fits their other wide receiver skill set a little bit better than Michael Pittman. Plus, if Rank was here, he would tell you the Bears have been a very stingy defensive unit this year. So if you have an option, I would try to get away from MPJ.
All right, so a rough start there. A rough start for the tight end position as a whole. We've seen people campaigning to get kickers out of football. If these keep going, they may campaign to get tight ends out of football. Which ones do we start, Mike?
There's one player making sure that we do not get rid of the tight end position right now. It took 3 weeks for Brock Bowers to become an absolute must-start in fantasy football. He is the tight end 2 on the year right now behind only Isaiah Likely, and he has been a top 3 tight end each week so far. He has 1 less target than Devontae Adams on the year for the Raiders, which shows you just how involved in this offense he has been. A lot of air yards. I love the way they're using him. They use him as a tight end, a slot receiver. We even see him play in the backfield at times. In this matchup, given how productive and how much usage he has, you gotta start him. And then I said only one tight end has more points than Brock Bowers. It is Isaiah Likely. A bad week 2 does not erase what we saw in week 1. He is still, like I said, the tight end 1 right now on the year. What I need to figure out, and what I'm hoping we figure out this week, is were the 2 tight end set usage in week 1 a matchup thing, or were the lack of 2 tight end usage in week 2 more of a matchup thing? But either way, when Isaiah Likely has been on the field and given the opportunities, he's been extremely productive. And given the state of the tight end position, I don't see how you have a better option. I'm rolling with him. And then Hunter Henry. He leads all tight ends in targets last week. He gave you 18.9 fantasy points and was the tight end 2. On the year, he leads the Patriots in targets, catches, receiving yards, air yards, and end zone targets. He might be the only tight end in the NFL that could say he leads his team in all of those. The usage has him in play right now, and I think if it continues, he will just become a set it and forget it tight end that you could start each and every week.
Yeah.